Well, welcome back to lesson number 2 of the New Mappers workshop. Today we're going to be talking about visportals. Now that might seem like kind of a technical thing to jump into in lesson number 2. I mean, we haven't even opened Dark Radiant yet. But visportals are actually really important when it comes to performance for your map. And this workshop is all about helping you get to a completed, releasable mission. And avoiding some of the pitfalls. And one of the pitfalls is coming up with a fantastic map, spending months creating this beautiful scene, and then realizing that it runs like a slideshow because it was not visportaled, and it's no longer possible to visportal it properly because of the way it was built. And so you have to take it all apart and redo it, and that is extremely demoralizing. That has been the death knell for more than one dark mod map. So I want to make sure that you avoid that frustration. And so we're going to learn how visportals work and how you need to design your map with them in mind. So to begin with, we're going to take a look at what happens when you don't have any visportals in your map. I've created the map that you see there with 6 mansion rooms, and the player is located down in the southern part of the map and is looking north. Now, when you go into the game, there's some useful commands that you can use to help you test performance. I'm going to type in show try 3. And what this does is shows you all the tries, all the triangles that are being rendered by the engine, or at least are being calculated by the engine. You can see every room there. You can see the AI standing inside the room, and the rooms become overlapped so much that it just becomes a white mess down the hall. Everything is being rendered. Now, if you type in our show primitives, this gives you some useful values, including draws, which is draw calls, and shadows. Those 2 numbers are the ones you're going to care about the most. But those values are extremely high. 4,500 draw calls is high. More important, though, is the shadow value. 124K is probably far too high. You want to keep it under 100 or even under 80 if possible. The reason they're so high is because the entire map is being drawn. Now, as you move forward, you'll see that the draw calls and the shadows are going down. That's because the engine does not render things that are outside the player's point of view. So the things that are behind you are not being rendered. So when you stare directly at a wall like this, it's not rendering very much at all. The more that's in your view, the more that's rendered. So what do we do about this? 124K shadows is way too many for performance, so we need to cut that down. But we don't want to start reducing the complexity of the map. Now remember, the problem is that everything that you can see in the yellow here is in the player's field of view. It doesn't matter that it's blocked by things. It doesn't matter that there's walls in the way. The engine is drawing everything, and that's what we need to fix. We need to create what are called visleafs. And visleafs are separate areas that the engine basically renders one at a time. Speaking really generally, the engine will only render or completely render the visleaf that you're in. When you have no visportals, the entire map is one big visleaf, and so it renders everything that's in your field of view. When you have multiple visleafs, the engine will check to see whether you can actually see into the next visleaf, and if you can't, it won't render it. We'll cover how to make visleaves later. For now, all you need to know is that they're created by brushes and visportals. So for these 6 rooms in the hallway, I've surrounded them with brushes, and I've put visportals in the open doorways. They're marked in red. And what that does is it makes each room its own visleaf. Everything inside that blue box will now only be rendered if the player can actually see in. The hallway is now the visleaf that the player is standing in, and so the entire hallway will be rendered as long as it's in the player's field of view, but only the parts of each room that the player can actually see will be rendered. And if you look at the difference in values now, the draw calls have dropped by more than half, and so have the shadows. The command rshowPortals1 will allow you to see your visportals on screen. You can see the 6 green rectangles there. Those are the portals. Where you can really see the difference, though, is when you go back to the showTry command. You can see now that we can't actually see any of the details in any of the rooms. All we can really see being rendered is the hallway and just a little touch of each door where we can kind of see in. But that's it. And that's why our performance has gotten to much better levels, because those rooms are now separate visleafs and we can't really see in. So that's the power of using visportals. However, it can get even better. At the moment, even though the rooms are separate visleafs, the engine still has to calculate what the player can and can't see when it's deciding what to render, and that does take some processing power. We can arrange the visportals in a way that creates a shortcut so that the engine doesn't even have to check whether something is visible or not. And this is where we get into the difference between open visportals and closed visportals. So first of all, the engine checks the visleaf the player is currently in. Any visportal that touches that visleaf is automatically open if it's within the player's field of vision. Once you get to visportals that aren't touching the visleaf you're in, it gets a little more complicated. It helps to think of the visportals that are touching your visleaf as windows, and then imagine looking through that window. If you can see the visportal beyond, then it's open. If you can't see it, if you don't have a direct line of sight, then it's closed. So let's look at how closed visportals work in practice. So in addition to the visportals in the doorway, I've added 2 longer ones further back in the far rooms. You can see them here highlighted in red. When the player begins, there's no direct line of sight through the visportal in the door to that larger visportal, which means it'll show up as red and be closed. That means that anything beyond that visportal, the red area on the map here, the engine doesn't even have to check to see if it's visible. It automatically knows that that area cannot be seen by the player, and so it doesn't have to calculate anything for that region. And the second larger portal will stay closed even as the player walks up the hall. It's not until they get rather close to the room that suddenly there's a direct line between the portal in the doorway and the larger portal, which then opens it up. And then even though you still can't see anything beyond, the engine does have to check to make sure you can't see anything. So if you want to set your map up so that visportals can close easily, and we do, then there are 2 main ways to do it. One is to use corners. The other is to use choke points. And we'll take a quick look at both of those. So if you look at these 2 rooms as an example, there's a hallway with 2 visportals in it, and if the player is located in room 2 where he is in this image, there's no direct line of sight between the 2 portals, and so room 1 will be closed off. It won't have to be calculated at all because that portal will be closed. But if the player moves just a little bit up, then they will be able to see directly into room 1. So that portal will open, and now the engine has to calculate everything in room 1 to see if the player can actually see it from their location. What do you do about this? Well, the easiest thing to do is to change the way the rooms are connected. If you put a single bend or even 2 bends into the hallway connecting the rooms, then the player cannot get a direct line of sight anywhere. It doesn't matter where they are. There's no way to line up those portals so that room 1 is open. So when you're designing your map, keep in mind that corners are your friend. The other thing that helps with visportals is to keep in mind that the smaller the portal, the less chance that you'll be able to see through it to some other portal. If you notice, I've added a new visportal to the hallway here. I've made it quite small, and what happens is that almost no matter where you stand, at least one other portal is now forced closed. And if you're on one side of the hall or the other, it's sometimes quite a number of portals that close. This wouldn't happen if it was a wide portal that crossed the entire hallway. This is what I meant by choke points. If you have very, very wide open areas, it's very difficult to create small places to put portals like this. And if your portals are really big, then chances are you're going to be able to see through them to other portals and everything will stay open. This is why you've probably heard that wide open areas are difficult to do in the Dark mod. So, why are we talking about this now? Well, this is the stage where you're going to be starting to plan out the individual rooms of your mission. And by rooms, we could be referring to indoor spaces or outdoor spaces. For example, this is how I had originally sketched out the mansion grounds for my mission. It was going to be an L-shaped yard with the mansion facade visible. But as you can see, that area becomes very difficult to visportal. If the player is down in the corner, the entire yard and the entire facade is visible. A much better design would be something like this, where the yard is broken up to create choke points, where I can separate the yard into individual visleafs. As you can see, multiple visleafs here are now cut off and don't have to be calculated. And those choke points could be created by buildings that stick out, or maybe a large hedge with a tunnel through it or something. Those are decisions that you as a mapper will have to make. And you're going to start making them soon, because the next thing that I'd like you to do is decide which region is going to be the one that your player is going to spend the most time in. And that's the region we're going to begin mapping first.